I'm going to be taking us back into Acts chapter 2. I actually started with the entire chapter of Acts being what we were going to go through, 4 weeks ago, and it's only taken me 3 Sundays to get to the bottom of that chapter, which should just make you feel extremely confident about the time that you will have here today. But I think that there's a whole lot going on there. And I think that it's important for us to stop and take a minute and look at these things and recognize momentarily like how profound and how scandalous some of these things are. And in doing so, also take away things that we may be able to apply to our lives and our Christian walk today. The sermon title, if you will, today is The Church. And I think that that's where we'll kind of find ourselves hovering today, kind of at the bottom of chapter 2. There's kind of a little paragraph there at the bottom that we're going to get into today, and it kind of describes what's going on in the first church. And I think it's incredibly important for us. If there are unusually large bags under my eyes, it's not because I had a rough night or anything. It's just because this is VBS week coming upon us, and it allows us the opportunity and the joy to kind of spend more time in this building than we normally do, kind of getting ready. If you go downstairs and have coffee and breakfast with us this morning, you'll see some neato little things kind of all over the place down there where we've designed some things. But I also think that this is important for us to consider because we're going to have kids and families that perhaps do not understand the good news of Jesus Christ and have never set foot in this church here among us this week, and perhaps really maybe don't understand what a church family is, or maybe have a bitter or distasteful view of what a church family is. And when they come this week, I wonder, who will they see here? What will they take away? And will we be obedient to God in allowing His Spirit to move through us? So I want to start off with a brief recap of kind of where we've gone through Acts 2. And to do that, we kind of got to step a little bit into the last part of the Gospels to see that, all right, so Jesus, right, who was God's Son, had come down and walked among us, and His ministry lasted about 3 years, right, and He had 12 guys that walked with Him pretty much everywhere He went, right, and then He was captured, He was beaten, He was bloodied, He was mocked, and He was ultimately murdered on the cross, right? And we come to find out that He is not murdered on the cross for some wrongdoing that He has done, but in doing so, He was taking our sin upon Himself, taking our punishment away from us. Sometimes I say to the kids, right, because sometimes, especially when you're talking to young kids, you kind of think you really want to hammer home sin, right? And then you kind of stop and think, especially when you're talking to a 5-year-old or something, it's like, what do they really understand about sin? You know, what do they have to repent from that's so terribly bad? You know, but maybe they can understand the idea of punishment, and that being that if mom and dad say, hey, don't touch these cookies until after dinner, right? And then they go in the other room or something like that, and they come back and 4 or 5 of those cookies are gone, right? Maybe if they said, don't touch those cookies or you're going to get a spanking, right? Or something like that. They come back and 4 or 5 of those cookies are gone, and you've got chocolate crumbs all over your mouth, right? It's not going to take long, right, for the judgment to kind of come down on that. And the punishment was a spanking, right? And so, eat cookies, spanking. Right? So, we see, and it seems severe to us, but I think that there's something going on kind of beyond our understanding, right? Beyond just the physical, perhaps that we just don't really grasp fully sometimes. But the punishment for sin is death, right? And sin separates us from God. I try to use this analogy with the kids a lot of times where, there's light in this room, but if you take away that light, there's darkness, right? So if God is all good, He is all pure, He is all holy, He is everything wonderful and great, if nothing bad, if nothing sinful can be in Him, if we take that on, like, God is not pushing us away, we've pushed ourselves away. It's kind of like the two wrong ends of a magnet. When you try to put them together, they keep pushing each other away from each other. And that's when we take on sin, that's what we're doing. And ultimately, when Adam and Eve in the garden said, I'm going to eat that fruit, right? And the thing that was kind of laid before him is God doesn't want you to eat this fruit because God doesn't want you to be like Him, right? And so really, the first sin, and really kind of every sin after that, has some inkling of, I want to do what I want to do, right? And I kind of want to be my own God, and I want to make my own decisions, and I don't want anybody to have control over me. And so the same thing that we see with one of my kids eating the cookies, we kind of see in our own life to kind of say, like, I want things the way that I want them, and I kind of want to be my own vice lord of my own little world. And in doing so, we're kind of telling God we don't need you. And in doing that, we're kind of pushing ourselves away from the Father. And we're taking on sin, and it separates us. And when we take on darkness, right, no darkness can be in light, right? And no light can be in darkness. When light comes into the room, the darkness goes away, right? And so we see that Jesus was not taking on His own sin, right? He was taking on our sin. And in doing so, He was taking our punishment away from us. He was taking our punishment away from us. And that punishment was death. And He sealed the deal on the cross when He lowered His head and He said, it is finished, right? And it would be one thing, Jesus would be a very great man if He just took our punishment upon us, but that's not where it ends, right? God is almost our superhero in some ways because death can't hold it, right? Because 3 days later, we see that He raises from the dead, kind of uppercutting death, right? And just saying, like, listen, like, you can't hold me, right? Like, my Father in heaven is greater than you. And in doing so, right, it offers us the ability that not on our own merits, not on our own good, but on His good, we can come through Him back to the Father, right, and defeat death and live eternally with the Father, right? And I think that, like, we would be wise to understand that, like, heaven is not totally the goal. It's God that's there. That's the goal, right? The goal is to get to God. Like, God is that wonderful thing that we want to get to, right? Heaven's just kind of that amazing dwelling place where He is, right? And so the goal is to get to God. Okay, so Jesus sealing the deal for us and then raising 3 days later sealed our deal for us to be forgiven to go back to the Father, right? And so He comes back and reveals Himself to the disciples, kind of His closest friends, right? And it says He revealed Himself to numerous other people, right? But He walks with the disciples for about 40 more days. And then ultimately, He ascends back into heaven. But before He descends back into heaven, He says, go and tell the world, right? Tell the world what you have seen here. Tell the world about the gospel, right? But He says, go and wait, right? Because my Father is going to send a helper to you. Amen. So, He ascends into heaven. So we've got this great commission, right? But then we kind of look at it. We say, how is this great commission possible? We have 12 reasonably uneducated by worldly standards men having the commission of spreading the gospel all throughout the world, right? They don't know other languages. They're barely educated in their own culture. And so how are these guys going to be the ones that spread the message of the gospel to the world, right? They didn't have TV. They didn't have Facebook. They didn't have telephones. They didn't have cars. They didn't have airplanes. How is it possible for this message to reach the world? And this is where God steps in and does what he does, right? And so it's very important for us to see here that the disciples were obedient to what Jesus told them to do. They didn't just sit down in a meeting and talk it over and make a plan with their own brains. They blindly and faithfully followed the instructions that Jesus had laid out for them. And so this morning, I think that something that we can take note of is when God lays something on our hearts, when God opens a door for you to spread the good news of his son, Jesus Christ, it doesn't have to make sense from yours or others' perspective. When we hear God's call, we need to blindly and faithfully be obedient to whatever he asks, even if what he is asking is for us to wait. Like, that's my least favorite thing to do, right? Ask me to, just turn cartwheels for 24 hours straight, but don't ask me to sit and wait. It's not something that I like to do, right? But this is exactly what he asked the disciples to do here. And we see that the disciples are obedient to that, right? But God's got a plan, right? And they're waiting as part of that plan, because we see that just a little bit later, right? There's this big festival in town. And there are Jews from all over the world that are there, Jews that speak different languages and things like that. And the disciples are up in an upper room when all of a sudden, like, there's this earthquake, right? And there's this great wind, and there's this fire that comes down, and it rests on each of their heads, right? Instead, it was like tongues of fire resting on him. And these uneducated men, right, from worldly standards, these guys, that, again, were kind of like, the backwoods country boys of from Galilee, right? These uneducated, from worldly standard men get up in this crowd of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, right, speaking these different languages, and they start preaching the gospel to each and every one of these people in their own language. And these people are hearing in their own language, and and they're saying, how is this possible? These guys are from Galilee, right? These guys are not roadside scholars, right? These are not linguists, right? These are, these are just these backwood fishermen guys that are preaching the gospel, right? And this eloquent word that we can all hear in our own language. How is this possible? There are some that scoff, right? But then Peter gets up and kind of addresses the crowd, right? And says, this is what's going on. And one of the first things he kind of lays out is Jesus that you crucified, right? And so, like, he's kind of laying it at their doorstep, like, kind of like making them understand, like, hey, this blood is on all of our hands, right? This Jesus that you crucified, this is what he came and did. And he lays out the gospel message to this crowd, and it says that 3,000 people were saved. And then we can start to kind of wrap our brain around how this is going to happen. 12 becomes 3,000, right, in a matter of hours, right? Because God does what he does with people that are obedient to allow him to do that. So we hear many stories sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with these, right? Like I was in drugs, I was in jail, I was going through this, I was doing that, and Jesus got a hold of my life, and I was saved, and everything was good, right? And these are wonderful stories, right? These are good stories to hear. But sometimes what these stories fail to do is do what Paul Harvey, some of you guys might remember Paul Harvey, would do, and that is give us the rest of the story, right? Because we get these kind of triumphant saving stories, right? And it kind of get us jacked up for a minute, but then we kind of, we may follow through with this. We may receive the gospel. We may repent and be baptized, but then we're kind of sitting there and it's like, what do we do now? Right? And so we see kind of at the bottom of Acts chapter 2 what they do now, right? Because I want you to understand that being born again is exactly that, right? There's a reason it's called born again. Like when I was born, they didn't slap me on the behind and say, well, he's lived a good life, right? That was the beginning of my life. It was not the end. right? And so when you are born again, when you are raised up new, right, it is literally like it's the beginning of your new life. It is not the end. So what do we do with it? Because that's where most of us, or a lot of us, are going to spend a whole lot of our time, right? So when we drop down into Acts chapter 2, Tom, I'm out of the NIV, and we're in verse 42. The fellowship of believers. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all of the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Amen. So, how is it possible for 12 men to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world? And I believe that the answer is very stupid. Or it's not very stupid, it's very simple. It's gospel-centered multiplication. God is working out the Great Commission through his people. 12 people becomes 3,000. 3,000 becomes 1,000,000. All because they truly and passionately loved God and loved others by going out and telling the good news. But more than just telling it, they were living it in front of others. And God was doing what all of us are incapable of doing for ourselves. He was blessing it to multiply. So let's take a closer look at what's going on here. I just want to break down a few things for you. We see in verse 42, they devoted themselves to the disciples' teaching and to fellowship. So, they understood the gospel. Right? They had received the gospel message. They responded with repentance and baptism. And then they devoted themselves to knowing more. They were learning, and not just learning, but applying what they had learned to their lives. Right? It's one thing to hear knowledge. It's one thing to sit in the presence of somebody, giving you this knowledge. And then it's another thing to actually apply that knowledge to your life, right? That's kind of the harder part, but ultimately that's probably why this lesson is being given. All these lessons in life are being given to you, not so they can go in one ear and out the other, as my parents accused me of many times, but so that we can apply them to our lives, right? Okay, and then there's something else. They didn't just come and hear a message and go home. They devoted themselves to fellowship. Meaning that they got together with those that were believing and really got to know each other. They were interpersonal. They didn't just meet together once a week. They really hung out with each other. They got to know each other, and apparently they kind of liked each other. The sad truth is that in many ways, people are closed off to one another these days. Maybe it's always been that way, right? I don't want to start to sound like a old man in a rocking chair, but it seems like these days people are a whole lot more closed off to each other than they used to be. Perhaps it's because we don't want people to really know what's going on in our lives. It's easier to just hide and just put on a front for everyone than it is to really come as you are and start to really let others know about your life. Now, I'm not saying that all technology is bad, right? I'm not extremely old. I have numerous devices, right? And sometimes technology can be an incredible ministry tool, but it's really changed the way that we live, right? Even in my life, I have seen family gatherings and church meetings and house visits go by the wayside because it's much easier and less time-consuming to just text somebody or to update your Facebook. No matter what the social media thing that they put out next, there really isn't a replacement for going to someone and taking the time to talk to them face to face and let them know that you care. But more and more we become distant from each other and more consumed by what we can show as our little perfect little life on our social media sites instead of really knowing each other. And the thing is, we try to tell ourselves that it's easier and it's less evasive to just text or Facebook someone, but I need you to understand that there is a world of people out there looking for something more, something real, something personal. And if they don't see it in us, where will they find it? There was a girl I was talking to at the Boys and Girls Club. We were trying to sign up some kids for VBS, right? And I was talking to her, and she goes to another church, and I was just saying, I have a great deal of respect for your pastor. And she was telling me, you know what, I do too. And she started telling me, because it's a reasonably large church, right? And there's a whole lot, and I don't understand how these larger church pastors do it. I have maybe 40, 50 kids that I have to kind of stay in contact with, weekly or monthly, and I have trouble doing it. I don't understand how they take care of, thousands of people. Probably something to do with gospel-centered multiplication. But anyway, she was telling us that her husband had to go to rehab for something, and she said that the pastor called her and asked if he could come visit. And him and his wife came over and had dinner with them and sat with them and prayed with them and walked with them through that time. And she said, that was something that was incredibly valuable to me. And she started to tear up, just telling me how much it meant to her that the pastor of this big, big church that had all these things to do took the time to come see her and her husband that was going to rehab and to pray with them and to walk with them and to live with them and to cry with them. Amen. And I'll be the first one to admit that I easily fall into this trap of just keeping everybody at arm's length and appearing to care via text and email because it's easy, it's quick, and then I can get back to doing the stuff that I want to do. But how can I ever expect allow Jesus to reach someone's life through me if I'm not willing to take the time to really open myself up to others? Which brings me to my next point. Non-believers want to see something that's real. That we have problems and pains. And that there are issues that we're still working through in our lives. And in that, I believe that we can lift God high to others. It's a common misconception among Christians that we have to appear to have it all together. That everything in our lives is all right all the time. We go to church and we put on our dress clothes, and we even have special lingo that we use sometimes here at the church. It's like, well, Jim, how are you doing today? I heard that your mother died, and it's like, well, brother, I'm doing all right. God is good. I am blessed and favored all the time. And blah, blah, blah. Have a good day, brother. And all this stuff, right? And it's like we've programmed ourselves to never really show emotion publicly, and then we spout out something that seems to be Christian just to avoid the question and to avoid any real human interaction. And I'm not dissing any of these statements that are made. Like, you may know that God is good because He is good all the time, right? You may know that you are blessed, and these are good things to recognize, right? But you may also be really going through something that's hard. And is it so terrible for others to see that or to know that? Fellowship is designed for us to really get to know each other, to share each other's joys and burdens. But how can any of that be possible if everybody just shoots back some little phrase at each other and never really gets personal about anything? Are you really willing to allow yourself to be open to others? Because much like Paul, when he pleaded with God to take away his thorn, you may find that your weakness, your pain, and your struggle may be the very place where God can work. Not only in you, but in others that really know you and see God at work in your hardships. God can use you to be an inspiration to others. But people aren't inspired by, hey, look how great my life is and how awesome I am, right? Instead, you may find that they are truly moved when they see you down, when they see you hurt, and they see God lift you through it. It may give them hope that then they can rely on God. And they too can be made whole again in the midst of their brokenness. That's what fellowship may really look like. That we see in verse 43, wonders and signs are being performed among them. Have you ever wondered what the church might look like if people were really and truly jacked up about God and believed wholeheartedly that the Spirit that He has placed in us has real power? We too may begin to see miracles happening. We too may begin to see wonders and healings that defy understanding. It's like we know with our Christian brains that God has power and that He can perform these miracles through us, but we live like the truth of that is reserved for other people and not for us. Right? Fanatics, but not for us. God's power is real. And so far beyond our comprehension that I believe if we were to really even get a taste of it in our lives, it may send a bolt of electricity up us that would send a chill up your spine of what God can do through us. And yes, really amazing things can and will happen when you begin to live into the Spirit of God. So let's keep moving in verse 44. They had similar interests. They had everything in common. Well, they had everything in common, right? I'll be the first to tell you that many times I don't always feel like I have similar interests with all my Christian brothers and sisters, right? So first off, what is the most important thing to you? Is it your job? Is it your hobbies? Is it your family? But if we're truly in love with God through Jesus Christ, and we are working to make our relationship with God the number one priority, then guess what? We all have one really big thing in common. That's Him. Amen. Secondly, if you're working towards that, and God is number one goal in your life, and you're really starting to get to know your brothers and sisters in church, you may find you have more in common with them than you think. I just found out a few weeks ago that our brother out here really likes to play chess. Like, I was on the chess team, right? It's not something that I bring up, in like all the, manly circles that I hang out in. But I love to play chess, right? And he does too, right? And he had even brought me some chess boards, right? And so, that was something that we have in common. And also, through the hardship of my wife and I going through the miscarriage that we've gone through, there have been numerous people that have reached out to us and reached out to my wife especially and just said, you know what, we've gone through the same thing. Right? You may find that you have more in common and that your dearest and truest friends lie inside these walls, and you may encourage and mentor each other to be better Christians along the way, but you have to be open to do this. Verse 45. They sold property and gave to those in need. We can inspire each other to be more sincere givers. I've seen people in this church that I knew didn't have a lot give generously to my family and to others here and around. And that's inspired me to be a better giver, knowing that God will provide. In verse 46, it says, every day they met together and they ate together with sincere hearts. Never discount what a good meal together can do to open you up to each other. We constantly see Jesus going to someone's house and eating. Why? Because he was hungry? Maybe, but I think that there was something more going on here. Good food and opening your home to someone else can in every way be a key ingredient in Christian fellowship. It may open more personal conversation. It may allow you to see and find common interest with others that you didn't know you had. It may just make you feel better to know that other people's houses are dirty just like yours, right? I love it when people come to our house and like everything's perfectly straight and stuff. We try to like present this house, and we're just begging the kids to stay off of everything until the people get over here, and all this stuff, because we want so very desperately for people to think that we're clean all the time, but we have crumbs in our floor like you may also sometimes. We try to sweep those up, but, again, invite people over, have a meal, see what God can do there. Don't close yourselves up from the world because you are afraid of what someone might find. Again, God may use your curtains that don't match your bedspread to be an inspiration to others to say, if he'll invite me over, right, despite that hideous Afghan that he has hanging over his couch, then maybe I should have people over too, right? And I'm being funny, right? But I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. We can't be afraid. And lastly, in verse 47, it says, praising God, they gained favor. Now, how can you do that? They gained favor because I believe very fully that if you are attempting to do God's will, people, even non-believers, will respect that, right? When they see you honest in times when you didn't have to be honest, when they see you give good measure towards them or towards others that you didn't have to give, even the non-believer can say, man, that's respectful, right? And they may start to wonder, why is that, right? Opens the door for you to give them the gospel message. And lastly, God added to their number daily. Daily. Amen. They were meeting together daily. They were doing all these things, right? They were fellowshipping with others. And when they started to get personal, right, God started adding. The church in Acts is not only one of our first models of a church family, and God did a lot of amazing blessings for that church, but I don't believe that it stops in the church in Acts. I believe that he wants to bless us today. I want to tell you one thing. It's kind of funny, and then I'm going to end, right? I lived in New York for a time, and we lived very, very poor, which unless you're a millionaire in New York, it's just hard to live well, and in New York City. And so we lived in this really crusty old like basement apartment, and they actually condemned it after we left. But to go to the laundromat, you had to go a really long ways, and you had to pay all this money, and all this stuff. And again, we were broke, and so sometimes I would just wait and like hoard up certain things, right? And when I would fly home for a holiday or something like that, I would bring all this stuff to home and wash it at home, right? Well, and I don't want to get like too weird about it, but like it was underwear and sock week, right? And so like I was about to catch a plane home for Christmas, right? And I saw this huge pile just kind of in my closet, and I thought to myself like, I'm gonna save that for home, right? So like I packed all my stuff, and then I just kind of dumped this pile of underwear and socks on top of it, right? They'd be kind of laying in this moist pile for I don't know how long, right? And I just kind of laced the top of the bag with that, right? And so I get in the airport line, and wouldn't you believe, I don't know if it's just something about my face or whatever, but like I'm the guy that they picked for the random luggage search, right? And I'm just like, oh man. And it's like this 30-year-old, like kind of attractive young woman, and I'm just like, great, right? And so she opens up her bag, and I just start like trying to, just go ahead and disclaimer this whole thing. Like, man, it's, and all this stuff or whatever. She puts on these gloves, and she starts kind of pulling it just for the whole, terminal to see, and all this stuff, and I'm just as embarrassed as I can be. And finally, she just looks at a few, and she dumps back in there because it's a bag. She said, just get it. Right. I wonder how many times we're like that back. We got some crusty stuff going on inside. We got some stuff that needs to be dealt with. We got some stuff that needs to be revealed, that needs to be cleaned, right? But we want to zip it all up, right? And we just want people to see that outward veneer. Being a Christian is not saying, hey, I got it all together. It's saying I know the one that has it all together. And I want to be unified with him. And I want you to be too. If you don't open your hearts, if you don't allow God to use the things, right, that he's placed inside of you, you're missing an incredible opportunity to minister to this community and minister to the world through what God's doing in your life. So we sing our last verse. We'll sing the first and last. And that is, oh, it's on the overhead. Okay. So, yeah. Stand.